Welcome to our live event. We are making a fun little quilt today, very basic, but we're going to be talking about kind of getting down to those basic skills, things to think about, even things that I made a mistake on, something very simple that I want to hopefully keep you from making a mistake on at some point. My name is Colleen Tucky, and I'm your instructor for Gingham and Giggles. This is the little quilt we're making today, a one patch. It's squares. The reason behind it is that it was requested. The mom of this little girl, her name is Maisie, and she arrived a week ago, just a little bit early. This is my newest granddaughter. She is number 12 in the crew of grandkids. Her mom saw this fabric, these ginghams, online. Now, gingham fabric used to be a thing. I know for a fact that my sister-in-law used ginghams as bridesmaids dress fabric back in, I believe, either the late 70s, early 80s. So gingham's been around a long time, but I hadn't seen a lot of it recently until it popped up in those modern colors. So we're going to be talking about using those and coordinating them with a kind of quiet background fabric so that you get a fun combination between the ginghams that give you that line and angle and a more quiet background kind of fabric to coordinate them together. Kelly says hello from Arizona. So remember to jump in the chat section. Let us know where you're watching from. If I happen to use a terminology or a product that you're not familiar with, just pop in there and say, back up. Let me know more about that. Or can you circle back to this topic or subject so that all of us as a quilt community, because we aren't just based here in the United States. We might come from the United States, but we stretch out our community across the planet. So there is Bridget popping in from Belgium. One of those places that someday I'm going to get to. I have relatives who came from there. Gingham and Giggles is, like I said, a very basic quilt. It's a one patch, but we're working with ginghams. So that brings up the debate about how to cut ginghams. Do we stay on the lines of the checks or do we not? What do we coordinate it with? So our pattern here, Gingham and Giggles, is going to be in the chat portion and probably pop as a QR code here shortly on the screen. So if you haven't downloaded the pattern, you can just take your phone camera over the QR code, and that will take you right to the pattern. There will be possibly a line where you have to put in your email address. We just kind of want to know where our quilters are from and be able to communicate with you, and that will take you to our pattern on our site. Now, the Gingham and Giggles, like I said, started with the set of ginghams that I had to go searching for because some of the shops in my area didn't have them. And the colors that I found, and I had to trust my screen for color. Now that's something we're going to talk about here in a second. Kelly says, I have twin great grandbabies due in June. Double the fun. Wonderful. That is fabulous. And Barbara says, good morning and congratulations on the newest arrival. Yep. It just keeps adding to the fun. And there's always a baby to have on your lap. And she's from Victoria, Canada. Okay. So when I started to look at these, there were more in the collection than just the few that I had here. One is kind of a mustard color. One was what they called blush, which is just a hint of a kind of pinkish pink. This was, I think, the moss. It's kind of a gray green. There was a rose, which is more of a little bit more pink to it. There was one called cinnamon, which was a little darker, but yet in this sample that she had seen, that cinnamon color did pop up. And then there was a kind of a pavement gray, I call this, or a cloud gray. So it's kind of all in that neutral. And then there was one more of the pink version. So this one was a blush. This was a rose. I don't remember the name on this one. A carnation kind of pink. And I decided when I was ordering that this would be my binding. So I needed more of that. That's one thing about ordering online. kind of plan ahead to make sure that you have enough fabric. It's not as easy as just popping into the shop and saying, oh, I need half a yard for binding. You might have to wait a week or two, depending, or even longer, depending on where you're actually the destination of the package is. I did order the navy blue. And when I got it, I thought, well, the cinnamon and the navy are the darker tones. That's good. But I didn't know for sure what I was coordinating it with yet. So I kind of shot in the dark and added some colors. Jerry says, good morning from the mountains in Pennsylvania, I believe. And Vicki says, good morning from middle of Tennessee. LS Craft says, good morning from San Francisco Bay Area. So we've got everybody popping up here. So originally I took these once I got them, and then I looked in the shops near me, but most of the shops near me didn't carry a lot of kids prints, things that looked like a baby quilt. And I thought about a floral, but I couldn't find the floral that I really wanted. And so I decided to try online, and I saw this fabric, which is a Humpty Dumpty print. I'm going to hold it up for you. I'm not sure how it's going to read on camera there. When I was looking at it, I thought it looked more into the browns and peach. When I got it, a lot more orange in there than I really wanted, because when I put it with my ginghams, that orange just seemed a little too brassy. And though it's an adorable print, the fabric that it's printed on is a little on the rough side. So this may get relegated to making baby bibs or some other kids item at some point. There's never a guarantee that the computer screen that we look at when we're ordering is color corrected to the actual color. So be cautious. Some of us see color different than others. I thought for sure this was going to be a match to go together. And once I got it, not so happy with it. So that goes into my stash. That's okay. It's still a really cute print. It just didn't coordinate with these fabrics the way that I really wanted in my head. So took my fabrics, went looking again, and ran across this little print. Let me see, the bigger piece of it is, where did I lay it? Okay, put it in my, here, back here. I found this little print that was so darling, and my daughter-in-law loves animals. And so I found a little print that had that blush color in it. It had a little bit of gray. It had a little bit of depth of browns in the highlights in the animals. It had the sweetness that we were looking for. So the pinks, the golds, everything seemed to be in this piece. And with the little bunnies and the squirrels and the birds and the flowers. So this became my neutral background fabric, so that the ginghams would have the place of honor kind of to pop out. But this is what I ended up with. But when I got it with the navy blue, now that navy blue seemed way too strong. So guess what? Navy blue got kicked out too. This is the process that we go through as quilters, trying to decide which fabrics, which colors. And as I put these together with the print that I chose, it's a very soft contrast. The cinnamon color is probably now the darkest of those to go with the background fabric, but it was a little easier on the eye, and that kind of soft baby feel to the quilt. So this became my 7 fabrics that would end up in the quilt with my background fabric. So that's kind of the process. The first thing you pick, your first instinct sometimes is right, but sometimes we have to make decisions, and that's how our stash grows over time. Lisa says, good morning from Wisconsin. Jerry says, good morning. Congrats on the number 12, right? It's amazing that there are 12 of them over the last 10 years already. We had 3 born last year, 1 this year. So as we multiply those babies out, and you can see my shirt says it's grandma life, and that's kind of how it goes in our house, in our family. Sue says, I have a stash of old gingham fabric. They're very thin. Would you suggest using them? You know what? The ginghams from the past are thinner, but there's nothing wrong with that. I know I've made quilts from lawn fabric. Now, that doesn't mean that it's green like the grass outside. Lawn fabric is a really fine denier fabric. So the fibers woven into a lawn fabric are very fine and very soft. And there's nothing wrong with using them. Just remember that maybe you might need to quilt it just a little closer. Don't leave wide open spaces in your quilting so that you are giving it extra stability as you quilt through those gingham areas, because the batting and the backing are what make the strength of a quilt for use, to be tugged on, to pull, to be drug around, to be wrapped around. So just make sure that you adjust your quilting accordingly. One thing that I will say, that when I'm working with these ginghams, now these ginghams, and traditionally ginghams are a woven fabric. A woven fabric means that the color isn't just applied to the top. In the print that I used, this, you can see the color is more dense here, and it's printed, so the back is very light. In ginghams, you will find, if they're a true gingham, they are woven, which means that the fibers are different colors. So in order to make those stripes of color, the threads going in certain rows are the dyed fabrics or dyed fibers, and then you get back to white, and then it goes back to the color again. So it's the same front and back, and they tend to ravel easily. And I'll show you exactly what I mean. See the edge here where it's been cut and handled a little bit? They do ravel quite a bit. So consider that if you're going to work with a gingham, and consider maybe using some spray starch or a best press, some kind of a sizing product on the fabrics before you cut them, which will help reduce that ravel. I know that sometimes people get to a fabric and they say it just falls apart when I cut it. It means that it ravels very easily, and it's very frustrating. So in this quilt, since it's very simple, we're only using squares, we're not going to overhandle the pieces, we can kind of reduce that ravel by using that spray starch or a best press to kind of help hold the fibers together while we're cutting and piecing until we get it quilted. Because once it's quilted, then it has strength. Like I said, that batting and the backing with the quilting process gives those fabrics that are kind of on the crumbly side a little more stability, so they can take the wear and tear of a baby quilt. Okay, so if it's thin, just remember that you may need to quilt it a little closer, but it can be used, most definitely. Okay, out of these fabrics then, in your pattern, you're going to be cutting 6-inch squares, so that everything within this pattern is a 6-inch square. And why did I pick 6? Well, I had a ruler that was 6-inch square, which doesn't mean it has to be cut a 6, but the math worked out for the size of the quilt that I wanted when I finished. So if you'd like to, and if your ginghams were a little bit smaller in the squares, you might go to a smaller square cut, but remember, you have to adjust to get to the size of the quilt that you want. But because of the size, these squares are kind of, the gingham is kind of large. So I kind of wanted a good chunk of that in each of the gingham squares. And that also allowed a little bit more of the picture within the print, so that when I would cut out maybe the fox, I had part of the deer and a bird still in that window. So the size sometimes that we use when we cut our one patch quilts may be determined by the actual fabric that we use. That scale does make a difference. If I cut too small, I would not be able to get out very many of the characters within, and I would end up with just a nose or an arm or a leg of an animal. And so the 6 seemed to accommodate that that scale of my background fabric really well. Let's see. Carrie says, good morning from Northern California. We're glad that you've joined us. In the process then of cutting the 6-inch squares, it's all about arrangement of these pieces. Once you get the background fabrics cut, I had you cut out of your ginghams 42 squares, and you're only going to use 36. That's because I'm giving you the option to swap out a color here or there, depending on how you arrange the pieces. Sometimes we need that, just that little slush of extra pieces in order to kind of get the colors to pop in the right spots. Um, uh, Gingham would also be good for a rag quilt. Kelly, you're right. It would ravel nicely. It would make a very nice fringy feel between pieces. So maybe the ends of my pieces here may become a rag, go into a rag quilt or a rag bib even. That would be kind of fun. Okay, so once you get your squares all cut, then it's about arranging them. And I thought about kind of doing diagonals or some kind of an arrangement of my ginghams. Now, the background fabrics, they're all, since they're all kind of the same, though some have a fox and sometimes there's a squirrel or a raccoon or the tree or a bunny rabbit on them. I did kind of want to arrange those in different places so that all of the same kind of vignette didn't end up in the same place. And when you have your set of ginghams, it's how to arrange them. I thought about putting together strong rows diagonal, but I wanted to have kind of even amounts of each of the ginghams. And how do we do that? How do we decide how to do that? Now, I use my living room floor a lot. I don't have enough wall space in my upstairs studio to design on the wall. I used to have a space where I could put up a design wall and move my pieces around and step back from it. Maybe I could do one here, but the cabinet kind of covers up space there. But one thing you can do, and this could be laid on a bed, it could be laid on the floor, spare room, family room floor, wherever, is use a design wall. And now this one has a grid on it, and this is specifically made as a design wall. But those inexpensive vinyl tablecloths that have that flannelly back, that soft back, work perfectly well. I used one of those for years in my sewing studio to the point where there was so many threads on it. It was hard to even tell that it was white at one time. But on this one, there are grommets, and I don't know if this is still produced out there. There might be other companies that make them, but the grommets make it so that I could just put push pins into the wall and hang the grommets over the push pins. And you put your fuzzy side out, and you can see the grid through so that you could line up your blocks and get straight rows. And it was a great way, and it is a great way to kind of lay out your design ahead of time so you get kind of a grasp of what you're putting together. Now, if you can't find a grid one like this, like I said, a vinyl flannel backed vinyl tablecloth, inexpensive one. There's always ones after different holidays, after the 4th of July, after Easter. There's always ones that have, themed colors on them, but you're putting that towards the wall anyway. So you could just pin that to the wall. You can also use a flannel board kind of thing. Some people put up a piece of batting to use to arrange your pieces on, but that way they kind of lightly stick and you can rearrange. And I came up then, there is a thumbnail on the front cover of the pattern, so you can see how I arranged the colors. When I made strong diagonals of any one color, it just seemed so planned. And some people like that. That's totally fine. You may do that. It's your choice at this point. You have the squares. Now it's time to design. I had more fun laying out the colors, letting them pop through in different places, kind of unexpectedly. So that's why I had you cut a few extra of the gingham in case you decide, well, I don't want two of the same color, like corner to corner or right beside each other. It gives you the flexibility to maybe use an extra of one color or another so that you get that kind of randomness to your scrappy one patch. Debbie says, can you tell us about the where you ordered your gingham? I actually went to Google. I searched gingham gingham prints modern colors, and that's how I got to it. I don't even remember. It was on an Etsy shop. Somebody had them in their Etsy shop, and I could order by the half yard, I believe. Now, that's the other thing. When you order fabric online, you can't always get like eighths or quarters. Sometimes they'll have fat quarters available that 18 by 22 inch piece. Other times you have to commit to half a yard at a time. So half a yard or a full yard, a yard and a half. So be aware of that when you go into the looking for fabrics online. Also look at reviews to see how responsive an Etsy shop is or a quilt shop. Now, there are a lot of good reputable shops out there to order from. This fabric seemed to be evaporating fast. I did find it on an Etsy shop. She had fat quarters available. She had half yard cuts available, but I could individually pick. So you kind of have to be a little bit savvy about what you want. And I could individually order half yard cuts of the colors that I wanted. And like I said, I even ordered a little extra because I wanted ahead of time. I knew I wanted that one pink for the carnation color pink for the binding, and I wanted to go buy a binding, so I knew I needed a little extra of that. And I got that navy blue, not knowing for sure if I would use it, but just settle with yourself that yes, I'm going to order. I might be able to. The navy blue was something that I can put into my blue and whites and easily use up in a 4th of July thing or something for fall. So that wasn't really a terrible commitment to order something extra. Kathy says hello from Saskatchewan, Canada, and Martha is popping in from Western Kentucky. Karen says good morning. So when you're looking for something, sometimes, I mean, Google is very good at weeding through things. So it took me to an Etsy shop. It might take you to a Pinterest post. That's not always a place you can order from. So kind of be looking for those places that are business related so that you can order from them. And be patient. It's not always easy to find some things, but there are also all kinds of other really great ginghams and checks out there. Printed checks could easily be substituted in for the ginghams in this project. So keep your mind open that there are other possibilities for use in the same kind of same way. There are a lot of companies or lines of fabrics, designers who come up with, they will do their floral maybe or their whatever their design is and will add stripes and ginghams or checks into their, or even plaids. Plaids would work too. Into their collections. So when you look at a collection, look at the entire collection, you may find something really great there too. And Maisie says, hello. She says, that's my quilt. Yep, she might be actually awake enough to see it today. Okay, now, once you've got that arrangement, it's basically putting pieces together, simple. I wanted here's the other thing to think about. Some prints are scatter prints. That means that the little designs on the fabric go in different directions, that there isn't an up or a down to the fabric. So that's called a scatter print in most, or a variable print, but we used to call it scatter print in the quilt shops. Other prints are directional, and that matters to some people. It doesn't matter to others. So I used to say that quilters decided if they were a pointy person or a non-pointy person. That means that where your intersections of your blocks come together, if you want points, you're a pointy person. If close counts, you're a non-pointy person, and both are fine. The other determination of what kind of a quilter you are is, does heads up always matter? Now, I know quilters who will always, if it's a directional fabric, make sure that the heads on the rabbits are in the entire project, all heads up in one direction. Others don't mind if they go in different directions. Say for the squirrel here to go sideways versus the raccoon on the next square. So decide for yourself. Are you that person that looks to see if all of the prints are heads up, feet down? And you have to make that determination for yourself. Both are fine. There is not a right or a wrong answer. In this one, I decided, and most times I'm kind of a let it happen, but in this project, I decided heads up was one direction. So when you look at it, heads up of the deer here, heads up of the owl here, heads up of the rabbit here. So heads up feet down, and I went that way throughout the entire project. So you have to decide today, are you going to be a heads up or a random kind of quilter? And you probably already know for yourself which you are most comfortable with. Oh, the other thing about cutting out checks, plaids, or ginghams. Do you stay with the line or do you just cut the squares? Because printed fabric can be skewed. And so getting a straight line and a square off there may mean you're off grain with the fabric. In gingham, since it's woven, it still can be skewed as it gets rolled onto the bolt and shipped to the stores. And do we worry about that? Now, in my head, I hear my grandmother, at least one grandmother, and my mom saying, you have to cut those straight. They have to be cut according to the gingham lines. The other grandmother, though, my grandma Charlotte, saying, cut it, it'll be fine. So which of those two do you listen to? Cut it, it'll be fine. When we look back at quilts in history, if we go to a quilt museum, if we go to a quilt show, and we see antique or older quilts, a lot of times people will walk up to one where the fabric isn't cut perfectly straight with the design. Now, these are kind of straight, and that was not intentional. Here we go. There's gray coming in a square here, but it goes all the way over into the middle of the white here because it was a little bit twisted before it was cut. And you know what? I left it that way. See here, this one, gray square at the top and goes all the way out to white on this side. When you go to a show and you listen to someone looking at an old quilt where it's a little wonky, that you know what the first thing they say is that charming? Exactly. We don't have to worry quite so much about being so perfect because it's charming, it's quaint, it gives it character, it makes the eye move through the quilt. So if your gingham isn't cut perfectly straight, that's okay. It just gives the eye movement. It gives it a little bit of a wonkiness to it that says, I'm an original, okay? So when it comes to cutting gingham, plaid, even stripes, if it's off a little bit, it's totally fine. This quilt police is not coming to arrest you if you don't cut them perfect. Okay, so when you're laying them out, your gingham, your background, let's put our quilt back here so that we have a little workspace. And like I said, I am a person who doesn't like two of the same fabric touching each other. I don't want them side by side because I don't want my eye drawn to where three of the gold gingham all kind of make a big hole in the quilt. I like them to be kind of spread out over the project. So I was arranging things so that maybe two of these aren't side by side, okay? I would move this, and this is where that design wall, the floor, the bed, someplace so that I can rearrange pieces as I work and try not to arrange them too many times. Like I said, the edges are going to fray a little bit. And whoops, there we go. Squirrel's head up, frog's head up. Here we go. So if we were making just a 9 patch, this is how it would be put together into rows, row, and row. Now the gingham fabric is a little bit heavier because it's that woven dyed yarn fabric. So I press my seam allowances toward the background fabric here. So you may decide for yourself, but with gingham, like I said, it was a little bit tougher to get it to bend back on itself, and that gave me opposing seams. So I pressed my seam allowances toward the lighter weight fabric, and then I would be able to get opposing seams as I joined rows together. So row 1, 2, and I went down through the quilt. Then I went back and joined them into pairs. The reasoning for that is that you don't want to pick up row 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, because you're rehandling the portion you just stitched together many times. And that gives the fabric a chance to ravel every time you move it around. So if you do row 1 and row 2, then join those together and let that rest. Then do 3 and then row 4. join those together in pairs. So you're not having to drag the entire quilt top through every time you add a row. Join pairs and then join the pairs together. It's a little less bulk of taking it through the machine. Kind of divides up the work when you go to put things together that way. Okay, once you have the entire center portion of your quilt constructed and pressed, don't skip the pressing process. It's part of the whole of getting your patchwork neat and tidy on the back and getting those intersections to match up so that everything looks great when you're done. I wanted to do bias binding. So when it comes to bias binding, I did give you yardage. I believe it's half a yard for bias binding or width of fabric. So if you want to go traditional, go from fold to selvage and cut your binding strips that way, totally fine. But in order to cut bias, which means you're going to have to go at an angle, you're going to have a strip of fabric similar to this. This is about a half a yard length. And you're going to cut bias strips off of your fabric. Now, you can do a folding method. We'll pretend this isn't here. You can do a folding method in order to get that first angle. You want to take it to the deepest portion of your fabric, though, so that you get that first. And one way to do it, you can use a ruler to put that 45-degree line in there. You could just give this a press and then use that press line or cut along that press line to get your first angle division there. However, we also have videos on cutting bias binding, so you can always search through our website for making bias binding and applying bias binding to a project. I do have an angle left here from cutting earlier my pieces, and I have some of them here. Once you get going at cutting your strips, once you get that first cut, here's a little trick, because rulers aren't always this long, and having to cut at an angle, the shorter cut's always easier. I'm taking that 45-degree line here, and I'm going to lay it gently on top of itself. You don't ever want to pull on a bias edge because it will get longer magically and not want to go back into place. Now I've aligned that cut edge, and you can go then in with a ruler and you cut your 2.5-inch pieces off of your fabric to get your bias binding strips. Now, remember at the beginning I said I was going to give you a tip so that you wouldn't make the same mistake I did. Here is the mistake I made. When you're working, and I'm going to cut just a small piece here of extra, so I have a third strip of binding. When you're working with a woven fabric or working with a batik fabric, where the right side and wrong side, no difference between the finish or the look of the fabric, you have to be more cautious when you're joining your binding strips together, because it's very easy to flip back and forth. And you say, well, it looks the same. Does it really matter when I join these together? Well, I'm going to pretend that this is joined here as a seam. And I was so confident in my sewing that I joined my pieces together and went merrily along my way to putting the next piece on. And in fact, what I did was put, and I'm going to cut this as an angle so that you can visually understand what I'm talking about. I decided I know what I'm doing. I joined the next piece together, got my whole binding put together, big long strip, to get around the quilt. And I picked it up to press it. And I've got seams on one side, seams on the other. Uh-oh, that's not right. I need all the seams to be within the interior of my binding so that I can apply it to my quilt. So whenever you're working on a solid fabric, a batik, or a woven fabric, make sure as you put the next two pieces of binding together, if the seams are going to be on this side of the fabric, work your way along and remember that your next one will have to have seams going the same direction, so that when you get done joining them together, all of the seams will be, oops, lay that out. The seams will all be on one side of the binding, because there's nothing more frustrating to have your entire quilt done, quilted, trimmed, and put together your binding, and then have half of them seamed the wrong direction. And we're talking about bias binding, so you very gently need to take your seam ripper and cut every third or fourth thread, gently take it apart and flip the seam around so that you do get them joined properly. So hoping I save you from doing the same exact thing. Just make sure you know which is you're using as the wrong side, so all the seams are pointing up out of the binding in the same direction. Now, the rest of putting on bias binding is the same. You're going to press your binding in half, press the length of your binding, and apply it to your quilt in the same manner as straight up grain binding, but be very gentle with it. For instance, I'll show you, and if you haven't worked with bias binding before, we have a strip here, just a little piece. And right now it measures from tip to tip, it measures about 9 3/4. But if I were to tug on this and say, well, here, I need to put it down, I can make this measure over 11 inches. And it's not really going to go back in place very easily. So the stretch and the flexibility of bias binding, you have to be gentle with it. So once you get it gently pressed, and that's again why a little bit of best press or spray starch or some kind of sizing product on your fibers helps keep them kind of aligned. Press gently, and then very gently apply it to your quilt. Don't give it a tug as you're applying it. Make sure it just lays on top of your quilt top so that you can have that fun bias binding along the edge. Her sister's quilt also had bias binding, but it was a print, so it was a little easier to work with. So the gingham gives you kind of a fun design to the edge of the quilt there. Now, when it comes to, we have just enough time to talk about batting and backing. Let me see if I can pull my backing fabric out. I decided that a lot of pink going on. There's 2 girls in this household. Pink won't be a bad choice. So it's a very subtle pink and white print that I used as a backing because I wanted something that would go along with the binding that I used. So kind of think about that too when you're picking backing fabric. When your binding comes over the edge, will give a nice frame to the fabric that you use on the back of the quilt. One of the other things you need to think about, especially when it's given as a gift, is to get that label created so that the history of the quilt and the ownership of the quilt are there, and a date so that years later, everyone knows who the quilt was created for. I like to use just a white or a cream fabric to write on. It makes it much easier to write on a non-print fabric, solid fabric. And then I tend to use some either leftover binding pieces or fabric from the quilt itself to give it a little bit of a frame so it's special on the back, and then hand sew it in place. And I was using a fabric friendly Pigma pen for the writing of the name there. A lot of times, sometimes I'll even write it out and then trace it. If making mistakes on labels is a thing for you, I put in there just the name of the quilt, Gingham and Giggles, created for, born, and then the date she was born, and then who it was from. So that finishes off that portion. Now, when you're making pieces and parts and everything, you're gonna have some leftover pieces. So the last little thing you can add to a gift is to add a little bib that matches. And we have a video and a tutorial about making these little bibs from scratch. We're using a piece of batting, scrap batting. You can even piece together pieces of batting to use up. I think there might be 2 or 3 pieces inside this one originally. As I got started, I actually piece onto the batting itself. The template is included in that pattern, so then draw around it. once you've covered enough area for the pattern to fit over the top, then I go back and I quilt it through the batting so that all the little scraps that are used up here are quilted onto the batting. And then I add a backing fabric, a little string here, some leftover backing fabric as the back of the bib, and add a plastic snap. Do a little stitch around the outside, I guess, before we put the snap on. And we have a coordinated look to give along with our baby quilt. So that's a little add-on thing that you can go to the link there for the bib pattern. I think there's 2 sizes, I believe, of the small and the larger for toddlers, and you can use up leftover pieces. So thanks for joining me today. I hope that the Gingham and Giggles makes you think about, checks, plaids, and a background fabric, and what can I make? Thanks for joining me today.